Hi, I'm Marty Grizzanti, and this is The Marty Grizzanti Show. As a full-time real estate investor and business owner, I have a real fascination of finding the key principles for business success and personal development. This show is a reflection of my personal mission to find out what truly makes somebody successful in business and in life. We will find tools and tactics that they've used to reach those levels. If you're the type of person is not satisfied with average and you have a hunger for learning that will never cease, this show is for you. Welcome to the show. What's up, guys? Marty Grizzanti here for the Marty Grizzanti Show. It's been a while since I got on, and I thought it would be good to kind of give you a little background on me. I know it's been a while since it's just been a one-on-one me with you type of podcast, so I thought it would be good. So what I want to talk about is, I want to talk about four things. The first is just a little bit of background. So my partner, Matt, and I, we started this company in 2016, this real estate investment company. And really it was because we didn't necessarily know what we wanted to do with our lives. And we wanted to be successful. We knew that. We just wanted more success faster. And the place that we were at, that current job at the time, we weren't able to go as far as we wanted to go without having to do the politics of it, right? Just the time in and, the ass kissing, all the things that you have to do in some places in order to move up. And if you don't necessarily believe in the leadership of that company, it gets really, really tough to, strive to make and hit those next levels in order to move up. So we knew, just like anybody listening, you kind of got to take the bull by the horns and you have to be in control over your own destiny. You kind of have to be okay with what that means too, right? Being in control of your own life. You think that would be common sense, but unfortunately, a lot of us depend on others. And that can get really tough and a slippery slope, especially when you do work a 9-to-5 job and you think you're safe and then you get handed a pink slip, which is happening right now. Whatever they're telling you on whatever news outlet you get your information from, there are some tough times ahead. And I am never been more confident with where I am because I'm in control. And I've already made that commitment. I've already come to that understanding that, hey, that's the beautiful part. I'm in control of the good and the bad. I just couldn't have somebody else be looking out for me over my life and my work, right? So that's really why we got started in real estate. Real estate doesn't necessarily always something that I love. It's just I know that it's something that I can control the most out of any business. And it's helpful that 90% of all millionaires come from real estate, right? Or they have real estate a part of their portfolio. So that's a little bit about me, right? 2016, we started, we bought one house. From day one, I think, kind of shortcut everything. One of the most important things that we did day one was we used other people's money. So I see a lot of people who want to grow, but they're scared to ask for private lending, ask for hard money, because you may think that it's hard to find, and it can be, but if you have that mentality of like, I'm doing them a favor by working with me. So hard money, while it does, and it is useful for the growth of our portfolio, I know that I'm doing them a favor. They need to have their money work for them, especially now more than ever with the unreliability of the stock market and everything else and just not really sure what's going to happen in the future. Well, I know that money that they have that they need to get to work, I'm going to be able to be, first of all, a good steward for it, and I'm going to be able to use it to grow my business. But you have to be okay with knowing that. So a lot of people maybe do one or two deals and they kind of get stuck because, of course, you're using your own money. There's only so much money you have. But when you can use other people's money, who that's what their job is to put their money to the work, you can really grow. So that was number one that we did that was very helpful. And that was an unfair advantage that I got to learn about OPM, other people's money. So if you do believe in yourself and you believe in the product, right? If you believe in that real estate that you're buying, I encourage you to use other people's money because you're going to be not only developing a partnership with that person that you're using their money, but you're also going to start that exercise of knowing, hey, every property that's out there, I have the ability to buy, not with my own money, but I know somebody or I know a company that I can utilize to really make this work. And that's a really powerful thing. So once we realize that we can, buy a number of properties with other people's money and then add value, again, we have to buy right? So part of buying right is knowing what's the value of this property and then understanding that I need to buy it at least at 60 cents, 60% of that, right? So if it's a $100,000 neighborhood, I need to buy it for 60 grand. That's just step one. Now I also have to subtract what the remodeling is going to cost, right? So let's throw another 20 on that. So now I got to buy this property for $40,000. And having that, knowing that is a big deal because what we're going to be then doing is then going to a bank because I got to make sure my hard money loan gets paid off. I'm going to go show the bank that this was a $100,000 house after I bought it for 40, put in the 20,000, and now I can get that 100,000 from the bank, at 80% loan to value. So I'm getting 80,000 from the bank. That's paying off the lender, and I'm going to be able to walk away with $20,000 to $40,000, depending on what you had to do and put into the property. And oh, by the way, I'm putting in a renter that is going to be paying market value, and that will be paying my mortgage, and I'll be able to get a cash flow from that. So high level, started with 1, then we bought 5, and then in 2018, we started flipping, and now we do about 15 to 25 flips a year. And that is the way that we provide for not only our family, but it's what we do and then use that money to buy large commercial properties. So we are always looking for large multifamily, large industrial properties, and we're willing to get creative. And that's one of the biggest things I want to talk about today. But before I get into creativity and seller financing, which is really the main meat of this show, is Rochester, New York. I am a 100% believer in Rochester, New York and upstate New York. I believe that this is the greatest real estate market in the country. And here's why. Long term, I believe in 20 to 40 years, and probably faster than that, there's going to be a great migration from all the places that everybody moved away from, or everybody moved out of, right? They all moved out of Rochester and then went to South Carolina and Florida and all those places, California. What's going on right now in those places? Really big problems with the climate. Really massive climate changes are occurring right now. And why Rochester and upstate New York is so great is because we don't have that. We don't have to worry about flooding. We don't have to worry about hurricanes. We don't have to worry about those things. And what's happening to the people that are down there, and it's very sad, is that insurance carriers are getting out of those areas. You can't even buy a property in Florida if you don't have a brand new roof on it right now. If you have a 2 to 5 year old roof in some of these places, they won't even give you insurance on it. And the insurance, if you do get it, is astronomical. The numbers don't work. And so what you're going to see, and we're already seeing it, is people are moving back. And Rochester's primed for that because we used to have a giant population here back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It was massive. Kodak and Xerox, all those places. So we have the infrastructure for it as well. So it's not like if people move here, we're going to be overly crowded. We can handle it. So I do see a lot of people moving back, and it's a trend that's going to continue. And I'm very optimistic of Rochester, New York. And it's not just the climate. We have a lot of great things happening in the city right now. Constellation, a Fortune 100 company, is here downtown right now. They moved from Victor to the city of Rochester. And that is a catalyst that's going to spark a lot of interest from other companies. And I'm looking at Wegmans. I'm looking at some of these companies that should be here already, right? But there's a lot of companies that are going to be coming downtown to the city of Rochester. And so that should give you a lot of optimism. It should make you feel good if you are investing already in Rochester. If you're not and you are interested, I'm also somebody who might be able to help you, or at least point you in the right direction. We have a great group, the Upstate New York Real Estate Upstate New York Real Estate Investors Association. We're on Facebook, the Upstate New York Airbnb group. It's a fantastic group. There's probably roughly 20,000 members on Facebook for the two combined. And we meet monthly. And there's going to be a lot of cool changes that are happening with that as well. And I'm really excited about that. And shout out to Josh Briner, my counterpart there. But a lot of great things are happening in upstate New York. And I just want to make sure you guys remember that. We have a really, really great opportunity here, especially if you're investing in real estate. All right, so let's get to the really meat of the show, which is how we buy a lot of our properties now. So when we were using other people's money, right, when we're using hard money, our strategy was buy multiple properties at a time, add the value, and then refinance with a bank. What's happened in the last 1.5 years, 2 years, 2.5 years is the interest rates have obviously gone up. And so what used to be a really great strategy or a method, the BRRRR, right? If you don't know, that's buy and remodel and then rent and then, repeat, is that if your interest rates are 7.5, 8%, it gets a lot tougher. That cash flow really starts to dwindle on you, and it almost becomes undoable. You just can't do it. So what we started doing back in 2019 is we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money on coaching programs to understand seller financing. And I'm shocked on how many people that have been in the game for a long time don't do this. So if you're new and you learn this strategy, you can really get ahead of the game and ahead of the curve because there's just not many people that do it. So what is seller financing? Seller financing is when you're talking to a seller and they're willing to hold the note. They're willing to be the bank. So essentially, high level, it's, I'm buying a property from Joe Smith. Joe Smith owns 123 Main Street, free and clear. And I go to Joe and I say, hey, Joe, I'm going to buy your property. I'm going to buy it through seller financing. And instead of me paying Wells Fargo a monthly check, I'm going to pay it to you. And here's why this is going to make sense for you. And the here's why is going to give you the benefit. So whenever you use the term here's why, it's going to give a benefit to the seller. But again, it's still a closing. So let me get to that in a second. But there's still a closing. I buy a property seller financing. It's the same thing as if you use a bank. There's still a closing. There's still attorneys. Okay. I'm getting the deed. They have title, right? They have a mortgage, and I'm paying them a mortgage monthly payment. I'm still in charge of taxes, tenants, and maintenance and insurance and all those things on the property. And they don't have to worry about that anymore. All they are going to do is collect a check. So that high level is seller financing. They're the bank. So why that is so critical for the seller and why that's important for us and why that's a great thing for them is, number one, again, what I just mentioned earlier was the high interest rates that banks have. Well, I can negotiate whatever I want with the seller. I don't even have to give them an interest rate. Okay. Now, savvy investors, savvy landlords, savvy people will want an interest rate, and that's fine. But you don't necessarily have to go and do that. You can do it where it's just a straight principal payment. So with seller financing, I'm able to dictate the terms. And when you're going, well, why would they do this? Why would the seller be okay with that? It's because, especially with investors, especially with older landlords who we buy predominantly from, they've depreciated these properties over a long period of time. And in some cases, they've already depreciated the property completely. There's nothing else they can't depreciate any longer. So when they go to sell, they're going to have that recapture. They're going to have to pay a large amount, typically 30 to 40% of that sale to Uncle Sam. Because again, they've been depreciating the entire time. It comes due. You can't get away from this. But what you can do is you can minimize that tax consequence. And so again, it's so important to know how to sell seller financing. So let's kind of role play here. So you're the investor and you're buying a property from Joe Smith. So I would say this. I'd say, hey, Joe, what do you want? What are you looking for? Hey, I want about $100,000. Okay. I see that it's roughly worth $100,000 and I'm willing to pay you that $100,000. But let me ask you, Joe, would you be willing to take your equity in installments? And Joe will either understand that term or he won't. And he'll say, well, what's that? Well, Joe, I want to pay you what you're looking for, but rather than me, paying you all cash, would you be more open to taking and having an income stream? And again, he might go, well, what does that look like? Well, if I pay you all cash, you definitely have a partner in this deal, Joe. What do you mean? I don't have a partner. I'm by myself. I'm a single landlord. I own this house free and clear. It's my only property. No. Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is your partner. And he's going to want 30 to 40%. And he'll go, yes, he will. Yep, I will owe a bunch of taxes on this house if I sell it, all straight cash. Or a mortgage, doesn't matter. Either way, they're going to have to pay the capital gains on the property. So instead, Joe, what I'd like to do is I'd like to pay you monthly with a nice interest rate. And that way we can minimize that tax consequence that you're going to have. And now you're getting the ball rolling a little bit. Now you're starting to, get some real rapport building with that seller because you're solving a problem for them, right? First of all, they wanted to sell the property and they kind of wanted market value. Remember, I said the house that they were selling was a $100,000 house and they wanted roughly almost $100,000 for it, right? Well, for me in order to pay you that, I kind of need to, can't give you all cash, but there's no deal. But if I'm paying you monthly, well, with the right rent, I'm able to make this deal work because what I'm going to always do is follow the 555 rule. And the 555 rule is essentially a framework for seller financing, which is at least the seller holding the note for 5 years. Okay. But you want to go longer. I'm always going for 20 to, 10, 15, 20 years. I want them to hold the note for a long time. And the reason behind that is because I want the time in order to know when the interest rates are going to drop. I don't know what the bank's going to do. I don't know what the Federal Reserve is going to do at any given time. But if I have a nice runway of, 10 years, I can be guaranteed at least that at some point, the interest rates will be favorable to buyers and investors. That's number one. Number two is 5% interest is really, over the history of time, a really reasonable interest rate. Okay. Now, I'm not going to start at 5%. I'm going to start really at 0. I'm not even going to mention an interest rate. But, 9 times out of 10, they're going to ask. So I'm going to give them a range. You always want to give a range. I don't know, anywhere from 3 to 4%, and then shut up. Wait for them to respond. They might say, okay. Or they might say, whoa, interest rates right now are at 7.5%, 8%. Well, what would you think is reasonable? And then now the negotiation starts, right? No, don't get me wrong. I do have some loans with investors that are 6.5, 7. Okay. But that's still better than where they are now. Okay. Moving on. The third thing is how much down, right? Most of the time, sellers are going to ask, all right, well, how much are you going to put down? Well, how much do you need down? Again, whatever they're going to take is they're going to have to pay capital gains on that. So it almost benefits them more to take a lower payment because over time, if I'm giving a good interest rate, they're going to make so much more on the interest than they would if they sold it cash and then had to pay the capital gains. But for this video, we'll talk about 5%. So I like to go lower than 5% down, but 5% down is a really good number. So, because again, it's still less than conventional, which is 20%. So 555. You want the seller to hold it for at least 5 years, but you want to go and start longer. The interest rate that they hold it at is at 5%, but you want to start lower. And the down payment that you'd have to give is, you'd want to be lower than 5%, but 5% is a really strong number if you have to give it. So again, the point of seller financing is to sell the seller on why that's so beneficial to them. You don't know what they need. And that's a part of the problem solving that you have in the conversations you have when you're talking to a seller. Some cases, they may need the money, right? Which if that's the case, you can tell them, well, look, Mr. Seller, I can give you your price, but it's going to be on my terms. Now, if you want me to give you, what I can give you cash, it's going to be lower than that. Okay? Your price, my terms. That's how it would work for seller financing. And the benefit, again, because you got to sell the seller on this, is the tax consequence that they're going to have when they do sell the property. And the other problem they might have is what to do with the money. For a lot of my investors, a lot of the landlords that you work with, they may not need the money. What they probably enjoyed was the monthly income of the rental. What they probably didn't enjoy was being in charge of maintenance, taxes, certificates of occupancy, the calls for the, clogged toilet, the sink is leaking, all those things. So you can say, look, I'd love to just give you a monthly payment, a nice income stream, because if you don't really necessarily know what you're going to do with the money and you don't necessarily need the money, I can show you how you can make a lot more by holding paper because of the interest that you'll accumulate over that 10-year period. You'd be shocked. The number one tool that we use every day is our 10B2 calculator. And a 10B2 calculator will show you the amortization and show you exactly how much you'd be paying in interest and principal on a loan. And why the 10B2 calculator is so effective is that you can work that up while you're talking to the seller. So as you're negotiating, hey, you hold it for 10 years, 120 months. That's what 10 years is, 120 months at a, 3.5% interest rate. I'm going to give you, 5% down. And, after 10 years, you're going to make an extra $40,000 in interest. How would that sound? Wow, I was selling this for 100, I'm going to make 140. Yeah. And that doesn't even include, there's probably a balloon that will be due at that time because I'm going to amortize this over 30 years, right? Because I want my payment to be low. And that's another little slick trick. Make sure, if you're doing this, you also add there will be a balloon payment due. Okay? A balloon payment is basically saying that at the end of that term, whatever's left over or whatever's owed is going to be due at that 5-year period. There's been plenty of times when I first started, I didn't add the balloon payment due, and I ended up having to pay the entire thing over 5 years. And that doesn't quite work so well, especially when you're looking at this as a cash flow kind of game, right? Because with seller financing, you're giving them the price that they're looking for now, right? Let's call it $100,000 house and it's worth $100,000. Well, over 10 years, if you're still buying it for $100,000, you have to assume the appreciation is going to come into effect in those 10 years. So by the time that balloon payment's due, and let's say you owe, especially if you have a higher interest rate, let's call it a 5.5%, 6% interest rate, 7%, you're going to have a pretty good amount of balloon payment due at the end of that time. Well, you can kind of digest that easier knowing that that property is now, after 10 years, most likely going to be worth $125,000, $150,000, okay? Especially with how inflation is occurring and how appreciation for these assets have constantly gone up. I mean, you can look what properties were selling for just 2 years ago, a year ago, and it might be up 40 to 50%. And I'm not saying you need to account for that when you do that. You shouldn't say, oh, this is going to go up 50% every year. But, 5 to 10% isn't probably super crazy. All right. So that is seller financing. Now, there's another strategy with seller financing that you also need to make sure you add to the contract. And that is ensuring that the financing is walkable. All right. Now, I wrote a couple notes here because it is, if you're not familiar with it, it can be a little bit confusing, and you do not want to be confusing the seller when you're talking about anything, because a confused mind does not make a decision. They'll say no. So you really need to know this backwards and forwards. But using walkable notes, what that does is it allows you to really leverage your seller finance property. And here's kind of a couple ways you can use it effectively. So number one, you need to negotiate the walkable terms in that contract from the beginning, okay? So when you're structuring with a seller, ensure there's a clause that allows you to have that note be transferable to another property, okay, or to a future buyer. And I guess this could make it easier for you to sell the property in the future, of course, but it also allows you to have cash and equity for that next purchase that you have. And so, making sure it's clarified in the contract that the note can be transferred, especially without having the seller approve it. Because if you have to go back and have them you want their money to continually be making money. So if they have a 10-year term with you and you sell it within a year, right? Well, there's 9 years of some really good terms that not only could benefit you, but the seller is probably really needing that. They don't want to have to pay that capital gains. They don't want to have that balloon payment in 1 year, if that's, over 10 years is what they agreed to. So that's another way it can benefit the seller, is say, look, I want to have I want to have this debt walkable just so I can make sure that your money is coming in every month instead of it just coming in after 1 year if I decide to sell this, and making sure that's in the contract so that you can use that for that next property that you buy. Now, the value of the finance property, because it's going to appreciate as you pay down the principal, and when you build up, you're going to be building up equity. But with a walkable note, you can sell the property without needing the buyer to secure new financing, which is great because that's going to attract a lot of buyers to your property. So once you sell and once the property's sold, you can use that equity proceeds from the sale as actually a down payment for your next purchase. And, the third one is building in the favorable terms for your future flexibility. So to make your property attractive to future buyers, you negotiate, favorable terms up front, such as, a reasonable interest rate, payment schedule, and a moderate down payment requirement for when you sell. Favorable terms make your property more marketable, obviously, but if you choose to use it as leverage for your next deal, well, I think we talked about this already, but you can use the walkable note as a selling point to attract more buyers, and most importantly, consider the rolling of the seller financing for multiple properties. So what I wrote here is, with the flexibility provided by walkable notes, you can acquire properties sequentially. So you can sell one property with a walkable note, use the equity or the proceeds, and then negotiate a new seller financing deal with walkable terms for the next property. So over time, you're just building up a gigantic portfolio. And at the same time, you still have all of that financing and all that good financing that you've been able to negotiate to continue to buy and buy and buy. And it's just an unbelievable way of growing a rental portfolio. So there's the seller financing, and making sure in that seller financing, when you're getting that and negotiating it, you're also making sure that you can have that note be walkable so that you can use that great financing and that equity you've built up in that property for that next property that you buy. Lot thrown at you today. A lot of, honestly, it's higher level stuff, but if you can dial this in, you can be very aggressive with purchasing, especially if your payments are lower to the to your seller and the rents are high. It's a huge cash flow game as well. And knowing that, hey, Rochester is going to be even more appreciating because of people moving here. There's going to be even more need for housing. There's going to be even more people that want to get into investing in the future. It really can separate you and grow that portfolio faster than you ever thought. So that's it. I appreciate you guys taking some time and checking me out. I hope to see you guys at the next meetup, and stay tuned for the next show. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Marty Grizzanti Show. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, leave us an honest rating and review. If you're on Spotify,